Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Keir Bowden Comedy Hour, or it's more commonly known as the BrightGen Winter 19 Highlights webinar. In a moment, as per usual, I'll hand over to my colleague Keir Bowden. Keir Bowden, aka Bob Buzzard, is BrightGen's Chief Technical Officer, the Salesforce Most Valuable Player, Certified Salesforce Technical Architect, and all-round Salesforce egghead. So Keir will be ably assisted by his erstwhile stooge, me, just a plain old head of service management, Clive Platt. In a moment, I'll hand over to Keir to show you the highlights of the release. Only approximately 460 pages of release notes this time round, so not much to talk about really. The usual rules apply as Keir shares his thoughts with you. If you have any questions, please use the chat question section of the webinar console. I'll collate these for Keir to answer at the end. So your challenge is to try and catch him out with something he doesn't know. Anyway, so without further ado, here he is, your very own Bob Buzzard.
Thanks very much, Clive. Your introductions, like your work, get better with age. Right, so straight on to the first topic for the Winter 19 release, fond farewells. And apologies, I've just noticed we've got a Summer 18 logo on the top left, and I really thought I'd taken all those out. So if you see anything about Summer 18 or possibly Winter 18, because I'm still struggling to adjust after Dreamforce, then please do forgive that. So, fond farewells. So we're all going to be saying goodbye to our field history tracking data after it's been stored for 18 months, unless one of these two things applies. That your org was created prior to June 2011, or you have purchased the Field Audit Trail add-on. If you haven't done that, then the release notes say you've got a few months grace period, which is nice and vague. So I would say it's best to act as soon as possible. Once that grace period expires, there'll be no way to access field history that is over 18 months old. So the Field Audit Trail add-on only retains data for 10 years. I say only, but I mean 10 years is quite a long time. However, you may need more than that. Or you may not want to buy that, in which case you'll need to start thinking about implementing your own backup strategy. If you need any assistance, your friendly service manager is here to help, but you do need to be thinking about that sooner rather than later. Support for Internet Explorer 9 and 10 on Classic ends on the 5th of April 2019. If you've opted in to extended support for i11, you can continue with that until the last day of 2020 for the Lightning experience. Finally, the classic Einstein Analytics Designer is scheduled for retirement in all orgs next July. So in Winter 19, you can edit, but you can't create dashboards using the classic designer. The advice from Salesforce is to start moving your dashboards over to the new designer now, because there's no loss of feature parity. So next up, we have some general changes that apply across all of Salesforce, really. So first off, supported browsers. I won't go through all these. I'm sure you can read them as well as I can. There's no surprises here. Basic message is make sure you keep your browser updated. We'll share the deck afterwards with this information, and this is also covered in the release notes. So a fair bit of effort has gone into Lightning adoption in this release. So the first thing we have is this Lightning Experience Welcome Mat, which contains links to resources to help users get up and running quickly. Now this will be shown the first time that a user logs into the Lightning experience, and a slightly different one is shown when a user is automatically switched from Classic into Lightning experience. You can customize the content of the welcome mat, but you have to build all the content yourself. It's not just a matter of configuring something. You have to point it at your own site. And given that it's only shown once when a user first logs in, I'd think carefully whether you're actually going to gain anything by doing that. I probably wouldn't recommend doing that. Another adoption feature, when users switch back to Salesforce Classic, you can ask them why. You have to enable this feature. It's not turned on by default. Users can choose to ignore the question, but more importantly, in my opinion, their response will be automatically posted to a public chatter group without you having any opportunity to pre-moderate. So if you're going to enable this, you need to be sure that you aren't giving users an opportunity to sow discontent, because whatever they type in there, everybody would be able to see. So if you get one very unhappy user, that could upset a few other users as well. Continuing with the adoption theme, the Lightning usage report has a couple of new features to allow you to measure adoption. The first is this switches to classic graph, which shows the 10 pages where the switches most often occur. So what that will allow you to see is people are trying to do things in those pages that they're unable to do. Even if in this particular situation it's something like chatter, then there may be nothing you can do about it. But if it's in any of your custom pages, then you can take a look at how you could improve that. And then you have the browser graphs, which show the load times by browser for the previous 3 months and the last 7 days. And what page load time means here, it's a measure of how long it takes before the user can meaningfully interact with the page. So it doesn't just reflect on what's going on the Salesforce servers, it could be impacted by some other things as well. You can also view the performance of your most popular pages by clicking the Page tab. So this shows you basically, I think it's the top 10 most popular pages and how they're doing. If they're the ones that people are spending all their time on, you might want to put some effort into improving the performance of those if you can. And on that, you can also scroll right down and see the page load times for a specific page for the previous 30 days if you really want to dial into the granularity. Next, I think this is a feature that a lot of people have been waiting for, display density. So this has been referred to in the past as tightening lightning. So the idea is that if you look at this snapshot of this account from my pre-release org, see there's quite a lot of white space there, and a lot of people aren't very keen on having quite so much white space. I can't say it particularly bothers me, but each to their own. So if I then go and click on my user account, my user icon there, which is Astro, because it's the default, you can see I've then got these new display density options. So I can switch over from comfy to compact. And once I do that, you can see that it fits a lot more information into the same space. In this particular example, it's approximately twice as many fields by storing the field value at the same level as the field name. Depending on what fields you've got, you may not see such a dramatic increase, because if you've got large text area fields and the like, you'll still have some space in there. But yeah, so easy to switch between the two, applies on a per user basis. So find the level that's appropriate for you. Another cool feature in Winter 19 is searching inside list views. So again, here's a list view from my pre-release org of accounts that I've associated with a webinar. Not sure why, but there you go, can't really remember. So if I click into the search box and enter United, then the list view is reduced to those that match the search criteria. So this isn't the global search along the top of the Salesforce application. This is specific to the list view. One thing to note, though, is that all searchable fields are included for all records in the list view, even if the fields aren't visible in that list view. So in the situation here, you can see University of Arizona, that matches a search for United because its address field includes the words United States. So you may see things that you're not necessarily expecting, so prepare your users for that. And finally, you can share list views in the Lightning experience. If you click the gears icon next to the search box and choose sharing settings from the resulting drop-down menu, you'll get the familiar sharing settings dialog with the options of only I can see it, everyone can see it, or I want a subset of users to be able to see it. So this is something we've been waiting for a while for along the feature parity side of things, so good to see that's finally come in. Next up, some examples, some enhancements to the surveys functionality. So 3 new question types. CSAT, which is choosing a customer satisfaction score from a list of options. Slider, which allows you to select a value on a sliding scale. And a pick list, where you can select a value from a predefined list of options. You can now add multiple questions to a single page, and contacts don't have to log in anymore to take a survey. Editing active surveys is no longer supported, and this makes a lot of sense to me because essentially a survey should be a template that everybody then gets a copy of and fills in. So if you're changing the underlying questions after someone's filled in that survey, it's going to be quite difficult to do anything useful with it. If you report across all the responses, you've got different people answering different questions with the same number. So yeah, that particular one makes a lot of sense. You can also pause and resume surveys. However, this is only for authenticated contacts. So if you're creating a lengthy survey, then make sure you tick the box to say it requires authentication. Users won't be pleased if they think they've paused it and then it turns out they haven't. And finally, you can now view the invitations that have been sent from the survey record page itself rather than having to click off elsewhere. that should speed things up a little bit if you're using that. Next up, some changes in searching. So this is a slightly odd thing, more relevant earlier, but what that means, what used to happen was it took time for users to build up interactions with objects and for these to get scanned and prioritized in search results. So they kind of got not very pertinent search results to the work they've been doing until they'd been doing it for a little while. So in Winter 19, they should be relevant earlier in terms of the user's interaction. It should pretty much immediately take effect. So new users or those changing roles should see relevant search results pretty much immediately. I don't know whether anyone's been noticing they haven't been particularly relevant, but if they have, it will get better if they switch. You can configure global search to include lightning knowledge fields in search results and filter options. And you can also filter on searches in communities now. And a couple of changes on the search results. You can refine these by a number range. So, for example, you could filter it to only include high-value opportunities between 1 million and 5 million, for example. And also tasks can be filtered by their subject. Next feature, quick text. So these are predefined snippets of text or messages that you can easily insert in a number of places. So when you're editing and a field supports text snippets, the button highlighted in red here will appear, and you can click on that button and you can view a list of snippets. And those snippets can have merge fields in as well. It's actually quite neat, and yeah, it should be a reasonable time saver. Final lot of general changes. You can now create and edit field sets in the Lightning experience, which is something I've been waiting quite a long time for. It's probably the main reason that I flip back to Classic from time to time. You can now bulk change the owner for leads, cases, and custom objects from list views and related lists. And also, I don't know whether anyone else gets auto logged out a lot. I do, because I tend to bounce around a few orgs. And what happens there is I get logged out and then I click OK or whatever, and then it takes me to the BrightGen homepage typically, which means that if I had anything that I hadn't saved, I've lost that. I have to remember what was in there. So what you can now do is choose to return to the page you're working on. You can't edit anything. You're still logged out. Your session is still gone, but you can copy any unsaved work, such as chatter posts, etc., that you might have there. And if you don't want your users ever to go into Classic, you can stop them. If you're considering that, make sure there really is nothing they need Classic for. Otherwise, you won't be popular with your users. Okay, next, Sales Cloud. The Einstein lead scoring app has been updated to only include leads that have a score. So you won't see ones that haven't been scored, clustering the place up. You do have to upgrade this though. So when you access the app, a notification will appear telling you that it's out of date. You can then choose to upgrade the current app, which will discard any customizations you've made, or you can create a new app from the updated version and then manually recreate your customizations. So if you've customized it, the bottom line is create a new one, copy those customizations across, or you will lose them. Forecast sharing is now generally available. This is for role-based forecasts only, and forecast managers can share their forecast page with any other Salesforce user in their org. Territory forecasting is also now generally available, and the forecast page now includes a timestamp indicating when the page was last refreshed and breadcrumbs to show where you fit in the forecast hierarchy. Members that are added to Salesforce campaigns will now show up in connected records in Pardot and vice versa. We'll show a little bit more about this later on. And the campaign members related list now supports quick filters, as you can see with the little highlighted button there. Quick filters aren't saved. They only exist for the current session and they can't be shared. But if you quickly need to filter, change a few things just for something you're curious about, quick filters are the thing to use. You can now configure Salesforce to reject leads from web-to-lead forms that don't use reCAPTCHA verification. If you enable this, make sure you update your web-to-lead forms so that they do include reCAPTCHA verification. Otherwise, you'll see a marked drop-off in the number of leads coming from the web. And if an email to a lead bounces, you'll see notifications in the highlights panel of the record, which is point 1 there. You'll see a pop out, and also in the activity timeline, which is the item highlighted in red with a 2 there. The activity timeline now shows if and when customers open emails through Salesforce. Emails sent through Salesforce, they have to be sent through Salesforce. It's not tracking it on any other applications. And you can also add the first opened and last opened fields to your email page layouts in the Lightning experience. And there's a few other email enhancements. You can add attachments to list emails, and you can also add attachments to Lightning email templates. Email templates can now be private, which your reps might like. Previously, as soon as you created them, they were public, so everybody could see them, whereas now you can choose to keep them private while you're working on them and make them public, or you could never make them public and keep them entirely to yourselves if you so desire. And Einstein Insights can now be customized to look for words that are relevant to your business. So you can create up to 10 insights, each searching for up to 10 keywords. And when an insight matches, it'll include suggested actions to allow the rep to act directly on it. And reps can provide feedback on whether that insight was accurate or whether it was a bit of a pup that they were sold. Next up, we have Pardot. So this is now a first-class Lightning application rather than a single tab and iframes and everything else that used to go on. It's got proper Lightning experience layout, proper Lightning experience navigation, so it should be a much better user experience if you're using Pardot. You do have to enable this, though. It's not turned on by default. You can now allow users to overwrite the prospect's opt-out status. Previously, you had to do weird things like disconnect Salesforce, update things, resync records, whereas now you can easily override it. However, obviously, you need to know that the prospect wants to opt back in. You can't just opt prospects back in without their consent, without exposing yourself to a bit of a slap. And if you're using the Engagement Studio canvas, you can now filter that by date to see how a program performed during a particular period. Prospects, as I said before, prospects associated with Pardot campaigns can now sync to connected Salesforce campaigns as campaign members and vice versa. And finally, some enhancements to a couple of the dashboards. The pipeline dashboard conversion rate now respects the date range if you specify one, and the campaign cost only includes the displayed opportunities rather than all opportunities. The pipeline and multi-touch attribution dashboard now, both those dashboards now allow you to view filtered or faceted opportunities, and only the campaigns associated with those opportunities are included in the return on investment calculation. So that concludes Sales Cloud. So moving on to Service Cloud. A few changes to Einstein bots. They can now call auto-launched flows without any code, so you can configure your bot and then configure your flow and get all that functionality without writing a line of code. You have session logs now, which can record the details of a bot session to allow you to debug it, figure out what's going on. You can train bots more easily because all versions of a bot use the same set of intents, whereas previously, every time you created a new version, you had to create a set of intents for that. And you can also speed up the building of intent set by using the data loader to create customer inputs, although you need at least 150 before you can do that, so you need to make sure you've got enough. And finally, you can launch dialogues based on exact matches in the responses of the customer type. So if there's certain trigger words that you know you need to do something about, you can look for those and immediately take action. There's a new button on the email toolbar that allows you to insert images into case emails. You can use Visualforce email templates in the Lightning experience now, but you still have to create them in Classic, so you still need to switch back to Classic for that. You can choose to store email to case attachments as Salesforce files rather than as attachments. Lightning experience is better with files than it is with attachments. You've got the nice file viewer, etc. But depending on when your org was enabled, or sorry, was created, you may need to enable this feature. When importing email messages, you can set the audit fields so they reflect the same information as the records that they're associated with. So when they were created, who sent them, what actually happened. And much like web to lead, you can reject web to case emails that don't use reCAPTCHA. But again, make sure you update the forms if you're going to do that, because obviously if you'll suddenly start rejecting all your web to case emails, that could be problematic. Next up, omnichannel. So a single org can now support a combination of skills-based and queue-based routing simultaneously. So previously, if you switched on skills-based routing, then queues-based routing would stop working. And the omnichannel supervisor shows tabs for both types of routing. And supervisors can monitor up to 5 conversations simultaneously. And they've also got this new sneak peek functionality, which allows them to see what customers and agents are typing before they hit send. So effectively, they're seeing every key that they're pressing. Could be interesting if people type something and then decide that was a bit flaming and remove it. You'll get a sense of how they're actually feeling. Service Cloud Mobile. So this application has some improvements. Now remember, this is not the same as the Salesforce mobile app. This is specific to Service Cloud. It's an application, a separate application they built themselves. So it's now localized for the organization's language. You can mention people in groups when posting in the case feed, whereas previously you could only mention people when commenting. And the Android app is getting closer to feature parity with the iOS app, in that it now supports posting files to the case feed and customizing quick actions with page layouts. Lightning Knowledge. You can map case fields to knowledge data categories, which the knowledge component, if you're using that, will then show relevant articles once you've put the data category in. You can now do mass actions on list views, which allow you to change up to 100 articles at a time. So, for example, you could batch publish a bunch of articles after a press release, or assign a certain number of draft articles to the same person to review. You can also add anchor texts to rich text fields, anchor tags to rich text fields to help readers go to different sections. And you can, I don't know why I've got removed the ability to switch to classic in there, that's a mistake as well. But you can still do that, it's just not particularly nice, specifically Lightning Knowledge. And you can import articles with translations, and you can specify the record type of the master article and its translations from the record, from the input tool, all in one go. So actually, if you're using translated articles, that should speed things up a bit. So moving on, analytics. You can now use the joined report as a source report for a dashboard. So we've been waiting for that for a little while. Each dashboard filter can now support up to 50 separate values. So if you're filtering by counties in England or something like that, you should be able to specify them all. You can set the decimal precision on dashboard components from 0 to 5 decimal places to be used in charts and tables. This is a nice one. When you're setting up a subscription, it now only shows you a valid user with access to the report or dashboard, rather than showing you people and then not letting you choose them. And finally, you can customize the numeric access range for those axes that display numeric fields. So an example here, this is a component which is showing the annual revenue for accounts, and the axis has been set to between, I don't know, 100 million, I think that is, and 200 million. So you can exclude things that don't fall into a particular range, but still leave them showing on the component, which is quite nice. You can now execute actions from inside an analytics folder, whereas before you used to have to go to the top level and then pick it from the drop down where it was listed. So hopefully that's a bit better. You can search for a report or dashboard directly from the tab. So again, this isn't global search. This is a localized search that looks just within reports and dashboards. And you can now create a new folder when you're saving or moving a report or dashboard, whereas previously you had to create the folder and then you could put something in it. Next up, Einstein Analytics. We're over halfway, by the way, so don't be too distressed. So there's been quite a lot of effort put in around onboarding for Einstein Analytics as well, starting with the welcome mat, again displayed the first time Analytics Studio is opened. Each of these mats tiles starts the user on a learning journey. They're actually quite good. It's worth doing if you're a new user to Analytics. And also the URL that I've shown there, www.einsteinanalyticslearningmap.com, you can access that map directly outside of Analytics, outside of Salesforce. There's also in-app videos. So these are placed in key areas around analytics to walk the user through a process or demo a new feature. So if you look for this icon, this play icon highlighted in red, when you click that, what that does is it opens up a freestanding, resizable, draggable video player, and you can keep that open while you're working. Again, a lot of good content in those videos. Users with access to templates can install the Einstein Analytics Learning Adventure app themselves. Not sure why they'd all want to be doing it, but hey ho. And this app gives you training on picking the right charts, how to build bindings, how to write SQL queries. Again, good, probably a bit more detailed than some of the other onboarding information. Conversational queries are now generally available. So this has to be enabled via the analytics settings setup page. And once enabled, the conversational queries are available in Running Apps, Explorer, and the Dashboard Designer. However, if you have more than one data set open in Explorer, conversational queries will be disabled. And the way it works is you simply type a few words in, it will give you a list of selected queries, and you choose the one that you want. Here's another really nice feature. Again, a bit detailed, but the new SQL time series function can use your current data to predict future values. So here's an example of a chart which is predicting coffee sales for the next year based on the patterns in the previous 3 years or so of data. So again, it should be quite useful, I would have thought. Some other Einstein Analytics changes. When getting the URL that you use to share a dashboard or a lens, you can choose whether the link opens the asset in the Analytics Studio or in the Analytics tab in the Lightning experience. Date fields and their corresponding parts now stay together, as shown here for close date, whereas before what happened was the parts used to appear just under dimensions in their own layout. Information from multiple data sets can now be explored in a single lens. You could sort of do this before, but you had to write SQL functions to do it, and now it's very much a point and click. You can rename the count of rows label. If you've got multiple data sets open in the initial state, they'll all say something similar. So there's so many rows seen, so you can change that label so that you can distinguish which one is actually which. And you can create maps by uploading GeoJSON files if the prepackaged ones in Analytics don't suit your need. And finally, what will happen when you're syncing your analytics data from your Salesforce data is there will be a slight drift. So things like if the configuration for formula fields change, then the old data will not match what the new data is calculating. There's a few other situations as well where there can be a slight drift. So you've got this concept now of a periodic full sync, which does a delta on a daily basis, but then does a full refresh every week. Next up, communities. So it wouldn't be a Salesforce release if there wasn't a new Lightning community template. Winter 19 continues in this tradition. The latest community features require the latest template, but if you update it in summer 18, then you're set because your template will be updated automatically. Otherwise, you need to upgrade. However, as usual, the upgrade may affect your community. So check the information in the short link shown. Reminder, we'll be sharing the deck after this. And make sure you test in a sandbox before you update anything in production. You can now create a public self-service center faster than ever because there's a new help center template and a guided setup. So it's just following some instructions, entering a few bits of information, and effectively you get a public knowledge base that people can access. And lastly, on the subject of templates, the Koa and Kokua templates, while still supported, you cannot use them to create new communities. And obviously they're not getting the enhancements that the latest Lightning community template is. So the advice is to move off of those onto the Lightning community template if you can. Chatter now has threaded discussions. Sadly, this only applies to communities. It's not in the main site. Up to 3 levels of replies are supported, and these are indented, as you can see in the screenshot there, to make it clear which message is being responded to. When you receive a notification email that a reply has been made to one of your posts, when you click on it, it will take you directly to the reply, whereas previously it used to take you to the top of the thread. and you can't delete an item that has nested content. So if you post a question, once you receive an answer, that question cannot be deleted. So this applies by default to all orgs created after Winter 19 goes live. But if you want to enable it on your existing orgs, then you have to contact Salesforce support for some reason. And threaded discussions are enabled by default for new communities, but you have to turn them on for your existing communities. They won't turn on by magic. And there's some new Lightning components for communities, including search result filtering. This applies to accounts, knowledge articles, cases, contacts, dashboards, files, leads, opportunities, people, and tasks. So not everything and not custom objects. Guest users can now access flows. So what this allows you to do is to capture more than just the basic information from a user. So privacy preferences, for example, is probably quite important to capture before you register them in your community. There's a topics component. If you add that to the record detail page, then community members will be able to assign topics to records. And recognition badges are now generally available. So there's Lightning components. One's a button to allow a user to give thanks, give a badge to each other, and another component that allows a user to display their hard-earned badges on their user profile. And there's a new related list single component, which allows a specific related list to be displayed on an object page rather than the current situation, which is every related list. Some other communities enhancements. The operators for audience targeting are much improved. I think you could use and before, whereas now you can use or and all these additional ones listed here. If you want to share a theme without all the other stuff that you've done in a community, you can now do that. You can export a bare theme and share that via a file or via the app exchange. It doesn't include any pages, any other aspects of your community. There's been 2 new standard themes added, the Ember theme, which includes a stacked header, and Webster, which takes very much a search-first approach. You can change the URL for most of the pages in your community, apart from the home, login, and error pages. And I'm guessing those are fairly tightly wired in with some Salesforce functionality, which is why you can't change those. And finally, when you use the community builder to edit your header markup, so if you need custom header markup, this will be validated as you type to ensure that you haven't used incomplete or malformed meta tags, for example. But basically, if you've got invalid HTML, you won't be able to save it. More other enhancements in communities. There were quite a few little ones in this particular release. There's a new report, questions with and without answers. So that shows you the questions that have been asked in the community and whether they've been answered. So it gives you an insight into who's asking all the questions, how often they're being answered, and who is answering them. And my money would be that it'll be a small number of people that are asking and answering them. It's normally a few active people rather than very active across the spectrum. The report shows questions across all objects and includes both answers and correct answers. File fields can now be edited directly from a community. Next one I'm very pleased about. You can now use sharing sets for all community licenses, whereas it just used to be custom community. So if you're not familiar with sharing sets, they're a way of giving community users access to records associated with their contact and by extension their account record, because they didn't have roles, so they couldn't participate in role-based sharing roles. And it's actually really nice functionality if you just want to allow a user to see everything that's, every order that's associated with their account, for example. But if you weren't using customer community licenses, you had to rebuild all this using Apex sharing. So I'll be able to get rid of a fair bit of code for that. So as I say, very pleased. Folders can now be shared with public links rather than having to share each file individually. I'll touch on this a bit more in files later on. The community content delivery network is generally available. You have to provision this. There's a limit on usage, but a CDN effectively allows you to cache files in a location that's geographically close to your users, so it should speed things up a bit. 2 new licenses, excellent, because we've never had enough licenses around communities. Lightning External Apps and Lightning External Apps Plus. So the idea of these is that they're like a community license, but they're a bit more focused on platform capabilities. So they have more custom objects, more API calls, better file and data storage, and the Plus variant includes CRM objects. So it's really, I'm guessing, what they're seeing is a requirement that people are needing community users with a bit more access to the underlying platform. Finally, the manage customer user permission has been removed from all standard profiles, which I would imagine is for privacy reasons. You don't want to open up access to customer users for by default really anymore. So it's gone from standard profiles. You can grant this access to people either by enabling the permission on a custom profile and granting them that, or by creating a permission set that is applied to users with a standard profile. I'd advocate going permission set because then it's nice and easy to control with a real level of granularity. You're working on a user by user basis, and if this is a privacy thing, you want to make sure that you've got that full level of control. So moving on to chatters and file changes. Another excellent feature in my opinion. As you type a post, Chatter automatically saves it as a draft, which you can access later via the My Drafts tab. So you're not committed to a post as soon as you start. You can move off and come back to it at some later point in time. As I mentioned before about sharing folders via the public link in communities. So you add the link via the actions drop down on the folder row. And once you've got that link and you've shared it out, then if you want to stop sharing and remove all public access, you can just delete the link and nobody will be able to access that, the contents of that folder anymore. So this is essentially the Lightning experience alternative to the classic CRM content packs. Some other changes to files. The file detail page is now available on the Salesforce mobile app. That is just the Salesforce mobile app, so not the Service Cloud mobile app, for example. You now get 50,000 content deliveries per 24 hours, up from 20,000, and 50 gig of bandwidth per 24 hours, which is up from 20 gig. And finally, folders are enabled for new libraries by default, so you don't have to configure anything around those. Okay, next, the Salesforce mobile app, formerly known as Salesforce One. So the downloadable app requires Android 5 Plus or iOS 10.3 Plus, while the browser app requires Chrome on Android or Safari on iOS. Salesforce tests this app against a limited number of devices, which you can find at the short link shown there. You aren't stopped from using the app on untested devices as long as they meet the requirements, so as long as they're Android 5 Plus, for example. But what it does mean is that if you encounter an issue, Salesforce may not be able to replicate it, and by extension, they may not be able to fix it. Users no longer have to go back to the full site to evaluate an account against territory rules when saving. This is now a checkbox when you're editing the account on a mobile device. And there's a couple of new opportunity list views, My Territories and My Territory Team. So pretty much all the changes territory focused for the mobile for this release. Okay, on to our final topic, which I'm sure everyone's pleased to hear. And this is my favorite one as usual, customization. So a few changes to the Lightning App Builder. Conditionally rendered components, so these render based on some condition. The conditions can now include standard and custom user permissions, which is actually quite nice because you could give somebody a permission that allows certain things to be visible to them on Lightning pages and not visible to anybody else. Clicking a component without selecting a position in the canvas no longer adds the component in the first empty region of the page. So in my case, that will certainly lead to less duplicate components on pages because I always forgot that. And you can now edit managed apps through the Lightning App Builder rather than having to do this through the Edit App Wizard. And a few labels have changed to be a bit less wordy. I've listed them here. Left-hand side is what it was. Right-hand side is what it is now. Typically, much the same thing with a few less words. Some enhancements to Flow. You can now display dependent pick lists in Flow screens up to 3 levels. There's a new name screen component which generates a name form with up to 6 fields on it. So things like salutation, first, last, suffix, title, those kind of things. There's a bunch of new input types, which I've listed there. Probably the most interesting one for me is the email address input that checks the email address is valid. Anyone who's been in this industry as long as I have remembers hand cranking lots of regular expressions to try and figure this out, which was ounces of fun and never really quite worked. And finally, Flow remembers the values for attributes that appear in both the Inputs and Outputs tab. So if you navigate to another screen and then return, the previous screen will remember what you entered, whereas it used to blank. Process Builder now displays a message if you create a new record change process for an object which already has one or more processes associated with it. So here it's saying opportunity already has an active process, and the idea is that you should go and add your functionality to that rather than creating a new one. Reason for this is basically if you have multiples, that will have a greater impact on limits, and also there's no guarantee of the order that the processes will fire in, so you may find that things are happening in a different order to that which you expect. A few limits around process builder and flow have changed. You can now have 4,000 processes and flows up from 1,000, and 400 of those can be active up from 100. You can have 50,000 scheduled actions or waiting flow interviews up from 30,000. And there's a couple of new limits, which are limiting what you can do with flow. So you might find yourself butting up against these if you're making extremely heavy use of flow. So the maximum number of flow interviews that can run per month is 20,000 with a UI and 100,000 without an UI. You can monitor these limits via the company information setup page, and you can always buy more. Whether you feel you should have to buy more is another matter. There's a new setup node that consolidates all of the import and integration tool configurations, so don't be surprised when you see things have changed around. You'll still get there if you use the search like most of us do these days, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem. And in Lightning Experience, you can now see the approval requests assigned to queues that you're a member of. So again, one less reason to switch back to Classic. This next one's quite interesting. So in the same way that the content delivery network for communities is live, there's a new content delivery network for the Lightning Experience. So this should help to speed up the time taken to load a page, as any static content, so things like JavaScript and CSS, will be cached, as I said earlier, geographically close to your users. And this is powered by Akamai, which is one of the world's largest distributing computing platforms. It's the world leader for this, really. This does change the source domain that serves the files. So if you have IP range restrictions for Salesforce, you may need to whitelist the Akamai addresses. So as always, test before you enable. And just to set everybody's mind at rest, this is purely static JavaScript and CSS from Salesforce that is common across the Lightning Experience. None of your data and none of your metadata will be cached anywhere. And what that also means is that if you've got completely custom pages, you should probably not expect to notice much difference in page load time because those won't be in the content delivery network. A few new and improved Lightning components. If you're using the streaming API, then you probably want to use the new EMP API standard component, as this takes care of a lot of the pain for you. I've written a blog post for anyone that cares about it at the short link shown. The available for flow screens standard component. This now supports a validate attribute, so you can add custom validation to components embedded in flows. So the validate attribute that you pass is a function, and that gets executed when the user clicks next, and it carries out appropriate validation and returns true or false and an error message. So that should be quite useful, I think. And finally, there's a new map standard component, and that displays a Google map with one or more markers shown in the screen grab there. And it's really simple and really straightforward. And when I think of the hoops we've jumped through to display Google Maps in the past, that can only be a good thing. And now our final slide, as everyone gives thanks on the Winter 19 changes. This is our longest deck to date, so you've all done well to stick through. This is the Apex enhancements. There's a new inherited sharing keyword which you can apply to Apex classes. And what this means is that the Apex runs in the sharing context of the class that called it. So this is similar to omitting the sharing declaration, as you currently can, with one key difference. If the Apex class is an entry point, so if it's a Visualforce controller, for example, it's the first place the user hits any Apex code, specifying inherited sharing means that it runs with sharing, so it's more secure. Whereas if you omit the sharing declaration, that means it runs without sharing and the user can see more records than maybe they should. There's a new callable interface, which allows you to loosely couple Apex classes. This one's a bit niche, so I'm not going to say any more about that, but if you want to know the details about it, again, there's a short link there with a blog post explaining a bit more about it. Batch Apex errors can now be set up to throw platform events, which you can then handle in a trigger. The platform events give you a lot more information about what happened. So your next piece of batch development, this is probably something you want to consider taking advantage of, because I think it'll make life a bit easier. The final piece of record type information is now available via the describe functionality. You can retrieve a list of all record type information keyed by developer name. So you shouldn't need any more SOQL queries to pull record type information from the database going forward, which should help in the battle against limits. And you can now create and edit custom metadata types in memory in Apex, although DML operations are still limited to the metadata API. And you can also update custom metadata types that you've queried, but again, in memory only. The end, that's it for Winter 19, 60 odd slides of goodness. Big release this time, not necessarily huge earth-shattering changes, but loads and loads of small improvements, which is really good. As usual, it's been a light touch look at the new features that we feel would be of most interest to our clients, because while we invite other people onto this webinar, our clients are the ones that we really want to get the most out of it. There's plenty of information at the official Salesforce release readiness site at the short link shown. And there's a trailhead badge that you can earn, and I went and did that this morning, so that's quite good. And in true Columbo fashion, just one more thing, Dreamforce. I'm not going to talk very much about this, but just a couple of the big announcements that were in there. So Einstein Voice, also known as Conversational CRM. A couple of aspects to this. The first is updating your CRM by dictating a memo, for example. So then what you say is processed to determine, if there's any records to update, if you've mentioned customer names, if you've suggested follow-up actions, all of this information will be created. And there's the siren. I hope you all enjoyed that. We've missed that in the last couple of webinars. So we've actually moved to a different location in the building to hopefully get more sirens, and it's worked out well for us, Clive.
I think so.
Can be very proud of that. The short link is to a YouTube video that demonstrates this feature. Other aspect is voice bots, where you can create bots deployed to assistants like Google, Amazon Alexa, and your customers can interact with the Service Cloud through that. The short link shown there is a chunk out of the Dreamforce keynote where Tony Profit demonstrated this. The other big announcement was Customer 360, which is around mapping the various personas that a customer may have across all your clouds, so Commerce Cloud, Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud, for example. This gives you a mechanism for viewing them as a single entity. And again, the short link here is to the Dreamforce keynote where Parker Harris demonstrated this. So there are a couple of cool features. They were the big announcements. Bear in mind, based on previous experience, they probably won't be available until the end of next year, and maybe not even then. So always make purchasing decisions based on existing projects, based on existing products even. And that really is it. Now it's question time. Over to Clive while I have a drink of water before I go hoarse. Do we have any questions, Clive? He said, done. Expecting the answer no.
Well, unfortunately, the answer is yes. So a member of the audience said, sorry, they've only just joined. Would you mind just running through that all again? So,
with pleasure. With pleasure. I could talk all day about Salesforce.
In all seriousness, there is a member of the audience asked which browser is best for Lightning, including console. They've found Chrome a little bit twitchy, as they describe it, and Edge seems to work best.
I haven't used Edge, I must admit. I use Chrome, and I've certainly found Chrome better than Firefox, which I've also used. Other people have told me the exact opposite. They find Firefox to be the best and the fastest, and Chrome to be the slowest. So I suspect it's probably not just down to browser. But yeah, we don't really have any recommendations about that. I mean, as far as Salesforce say, they're all supported. So I'd imagine they're endeavouring to provide the same level of sort of speed and functionality across all of the browsers.
Okay, thank you very much. One more question. Is there any news on My Trailhead from Dreamforce? So
they showed My Trailhead again, like they did last year in the Trailhead keynote. They didn't give any indication as to when this might be coming. Believe it's going to be paid, and personally I was expecting it kind of in this release really, but I haven't seen anything officially from Salesforce saying when they hope to make that available.
There is one member of the audience has added that they've been told it was Q1 next year.
Very possibly, yeah, could be.
Right. Okay. There's another question coming in.
Coming in thick and fast.
They are, yeah. So when is the deployment date?
This is of Winter 19. So Winter 19 goes live this coming weekend and the following weekend.
Okay.
You should check that on trust.salesforce.com, because I now realise I haven't verified that today, and things are subject to change up until the last minute.
Sure. Okay. Thanks very much, Keir. A marathon effort, so well done, and thanks for that. So if there's no further questions, just like to say thank you all for listening and staying with it. It was also a marathon effort from you all listening to Keir there. So if there's anything that you're particularly interested in, by all means, give us a call here at BrightGen. We'll be happy to go through any part of the new features that you might want to know more about. But if that's it, thank you. That's it. Thanks once again, and hopefully we'll speak to you all again soon. Goodbye.
Cheers, everyone.